Further ado, we'll begin our study in
Start with
Daniel
bad news.
3. Huh? Start with the story of bad news, huh?
Yeah.
Oops. Okay, let me change the comments here if I can get into. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Alright, so we'll begin. Let's read counterclockwise, starting with my brother here, Daniel 3.
Daniel 3.
He's bad news.
Yeah.
Well, the man believes in uniting church and state. He believes in doing a whole lot of other things. He just got confirmed.
Indeed.
So we read from verse 1.
Yes. So we're reading from verse 1. Our portion for this week, will be covering from verse 1 to verse 15.
Okay, this is chapter 3, right?
Chapter 3.
Okay.
1 to 18.
Just one. Each one read one.
Okay. Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold whose height was 3 square cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura, in the province of Babylon.
Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent word to assembly the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, and all rulers of the province to come to dedications of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up.
Then the princes, the governors and captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And then they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up.
Then a herald cried aloud, "To you it is commanded, O peoples, nations."
You hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music. You shall fall down and worship the gold image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up.
Amen.
We're on, you want to stop here?
No, we keep
Verse 8. Or is it 8?
Yeah, should be 6.
And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fire.
Wow.
Mm.
Good, Bud.
Next verse.
You're up.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're in Daniel 3.
He's out of it.
I'll read. Therefore, I'll skip you this time. We'll get you next time.
Okay.
Okay. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up.
Wherefore at that time certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews.
They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar the king, O king, live forever.
Amen. We'll stop here and discuss, and we'll continue on. What jumps out to you as you study? As we read this, what comes to mind? The big thing that
Stood up.
stand out to you. What is it?
Worshiping.
Worship.
The image.
The image, right? The image is honking.
The whole world is being called
Called to
and
the-
commanded to bow down to an image of,
Yeah.
an icon of power set up by the rulers of the world.
Amen.
The persecution to the people who do not want to worship the icon.
Mm.
And
And we're going to come into that.
yes.
Right?
So now in controversy within the hearts of those who don't, do that.
Exactly.
And basically, it would trouble the waters. In other words, trouble.
Right. Okay. There's one other thing. There's one other thing that's really starting. What is that? As the worship is being,
Oh yeah.
what it has to do with the worship, right?
The music seems to be the thing that is like the green light, and everyone participates, and that's like the thing.
Right. Right. It looked like a traffic light for worship. Music. That's wonderful. Anything else? It stands out?
It's like a celebration.
Celebration.
It's like a celebration, and it looks like it's something positive because where there is music, people get happy.
People are happy.
But
Exactly.
but underlying
Under the rug is
right,
something.
it's something very negative, very obscure.
Well,
Right.
let's think about this for just a moment. Where did Nebuchadnezzar get the idea to make an image?
Oh, right. Right. Exactly. Okay. We'll come to that.
Okay, we're going to come to that.
Zechariah.
As I mentioned in verse 3,
Uh-huh.
you can see all the earthly authorities are represented here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you have the princes, you have the governors,
Wow.
the judges, all that
Wow.
kind of people.
Okay. That's amazing because Kevin just mentioned that the whole world, the leadership of the world, this is like a new world order, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's a world government,
Yeah.
one world government. You have all these representatives from everywhere coming together. But let's go back to the point that we have just made. And where did Nebuchadnezzar get the idea to make an image?
So we see in chapter 2 there was a dream about the status, and then he heard all those interpretations from Daniel.
Right.
But at the same time, now he had his own idea
Right.
to come up with this image. That the whole image is covered by what? By gold.
Gold.
So
Which
it's
means my kingdom's going to last
right,
forever.
right. And so and then when he called
Uh-huh.
all these important people to come and to have a commitment and only loyal to that,
To him.
to him.
It's kind of interesting. It's like the golden age, and the golden rule. Whoever has the gold rules.
Uh-huh.
And so you have this situation with a gold image being built, and I was thinking about there was this place in Tibet where they keep applying gold to this Buddha, and every time you come, you bring a little piece of gold, and you apply your piece of gold to the Buddha. So the thing is now thick
Wow.
over all these years of people coming and worshiping this huge image that is covered in gold.
Right. Wow.
And I just thought about
Gold upon gold.
what kind of investment? Where's all this gold coming from? This is a lot of investment.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
And then I drew a parallel with that in the worship we have today.
That's
What
very
is part of our
interesting.
services, money.
That's very interesting because we have a text here that's totally opposite that. Let's turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18.
Pardon?
2 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 18. Mm-hmm. This is the opposite of what's going on there. They're adding gold upon gold.
Mm-hmm.
But
What verse is it?
verse 18. Can someone read?
But we all with open face beholding as in a glass the glory of the Lord are changed into the same image from glory to glory, even as by the Spirit of the Lord.
Amen.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so instead of building up an image, we're building an image, a different kind of image. Right?
Amen.
The image of God in
The
humanity.
image of God and humanity. Exactly. So while the people of the world are trying to build an image and build the image of God in us, you know. Yes.
It is a choice to behold. So
Right.
whatever you behold,
Your kingdom will be replaced by another kingdom, and that kingdom will not only not last, but there is a kingdom that's going to come at the end of all these kingdoms, and that kingdom will last forever. And so, yeah, alongside that, or
Yeah, well,
add into.
maybe this doesn't really go with that.
Go ahead,
Well,
say it anyway.
One thing I was thinking of was that I wonder what happened to King Nebuchadnezzar, because at the end of chapter 2, he was like completely invested in the God of heaven, and like he appointed Daniel and his 3 friends to like high positions.
To
So
high
like
positions.
he's like saying, I completely believe you, and then all of a sudden he's like saying, I don't believe you at all, kind of thing.
Right.
I'm just wondering what was going on in his
I
mind.
think
Like,
he started to regret. He started to think, oh no, I don't want my kingdom to come to an end, and so I'm going to change I'm going to change the prophecy.
so do we know, like, did he fire those other 3 guys, you know, and be like, I had, you know, it was a late
He
night
didn't
decision
fire
or
them; they were
anything?
still there.
They're still there on the plane.
Right.
So
Now.
so it's more like a political here right now, because he in his mind he thought that those important people may fight back to him in one day. And that's why he had to set up that status in order for them to submit to his kingdom, to his power, to be one. And that's why the status they call, like, what is the name of that? Kara? No? What is the name of the Dura? The word Dura?
The
Dura.
Dura.
Yeah,
the
Dura.
Plane.
Yeah,
the plane
it's,
of
it's,
Dura.
it's like you mentioned about the worship. So if those people, important people, don't submit to the Dura, which means to worship, then which means that those people will rebellion to him. So he take that as a considerations, and therefore he know that I have to watch over these people, that they might one day take over, they might one day rebel into my kingdom. And so this is a more like political issue right now.
Okay.
Yeah, that's follow your thought. It was very close. That kind of he want to put himself as a divine being between human and God, so he can rule even stronger. It's like
He would be stronger, right?
like
he
a
would
pharaoh
be
in
supreme.
yes.
He would be supreme above all the kingdoms, and not only on earth, but in the universe. This is a very interesting thing, because in every civilization, there's this idea of a supreme kingdom or empire. Not a kingdom or an empire that is not only supreme in one realm, but in all realms. This is very common in the Southeast Asian mindset, in the worldview, at least in the spiritual worldview. This idea that Satan has always wanted. He not only wants to rule this earth, but rule earth and heaven and all the realms. Different human, you call it, angels, or the intelligent beings,
spiritual.
and God. You name it.
No, he's not the one divide this kind of rule thing. The pharaoh in Egypt is before him.
Exactly.
And he used the same way to to exalt myself in order to rule the people.
Exactly.
I also feel like Nebuchadnezzar is acting a little bit the way Hitler acted.
Okay.
This is
Break
a
it down.
I think this is a a characteristic of those who feel that they have all the power, and they want to keep it that way.
Right.
So I think that I think that when Nebuchadnezzar set up this system of worship, he wanted to see who was by his side and
Yeah.
who wasn't, in order to
Who wasn't?
eliminate
Exactly.
those who
That's
were not
right.
by his side, so they wouldn't take over his kingdom.
Right.
Exactly.
That's what I
Exactly.
mentioned earlier. Yeah.
Now
want
to
to
go
know
back
how
to
it
to
controls.
go back to what really happened in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar, I would like to suggest that in him, this is what usually happened with all of us. At the time of revivals, quote unquote, time of revival, it can be a quote unquote or for real. Okay, during the time when we are having revivals, or let's say a power pack weekend, what happens? Everybody's hyped up.
We're on fire.
We are on fire. We are on church on time. That's happened a lot, and not just in the Adventist church. It happened also in the Christendom, because when is the most attended ceremony in the world in the Christendom? Christmas. Exactly. Christmas,
High holidays.
Easter, high holidays, basically. Power pack weekends, time or week.
Yeah.
But
Harvest
after that,
celebration.
what happens?
Attendance.
The bills come.
Exactly. Bills come in.
In this very month, we
Uh-huh.
have a holiday that many are celebrating,
Right.
All Hallows Eve, otherwise known as Halloween.
Right. It's all of
And
it,
there's a
okay.
lot of money dumped into this thing.
Hmm.
And it's not unlike as much celebrated as Christmas nowadays.
Right. So, a text in Hebrews comes to mind. Hebrews chapter, and that's 10. Hebrews chapter 10, starting with, let's, from verse, okay, we could start with verse 23. Actually, 22. 22. Who's the last one? Okay, let's start with brother here.
Hebrews chapter 10,
Yes,
Verse 22.
verse 22.
Let us draw near with a true heart, in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience, and our bodies washed with pure water.
Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. 24.
And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works.
Not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habits of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near.
All right, very good. You can read the next one, and then.
Oh, really?
Mhm.
Thank you. For if we go on sinning deliberately after receiving the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sin.
Very good. All right, so this is an interesting subject here. But the high point is here in verse 25, where it says that we are to provoke one another to love and to good works. Okay, this is very interesting because the Sabbath school lesson is just on this very topic, where it says, it takes us back to creation. God created man on the basis of what? The word L-O-V-E, love, on the basis of love. And the love does what? Unites, right? Because love unites, therefore, if you don't want people to be united, what do you want to do to destroy? Love.
Hate.
Right? You're going to have to break the foundation, which is love. And if you break the foundation, guess what? No unity. And if there is no unity, there is no, practice of God, of that love. And that's why he said, provoke one another to love and to good work. So what does it mean to provoke one another to love? It means if you have love for one another, then you will be united. So unity is very important, but a right kind of unity that is based on love, not based on greed, power, and greed, right? Basically, so going back, not forsaking the assembling together, because you need to base it on love. Now, let's go back to where we came from, to Daniel 3, where people have been gathered, people are united, but not for true unity, so false unity. Okay, and now we're gonna get to the part of that's talking about music. Okay.
This is talking about a community.
Right.
This is talking about a family.
Exactly.
This is talking about intentionality of time and investment in others' lives.
Right. Amen.
It's taking the fellowship personally,
Amen.
the Wineskin Fellowship of Believers.
Anybody would like to piggyback on that? About the importance of family, love, unity. Okay, let's go back to Daniel 3. All right, so it's talking about plain of Dura. It's like Dura means it's round, a place that's round. So basically, at the plain of Dura, where the image was there, so you can imagine that all the people were gathered around it. Dura means round. So everyone was gathered around it. The focal point was what? The image. The image that represented the king who made it. So if you worship the image, you were worshiping the king. We are going to come back to that when we get to the second part of this chapter, about how, worship and why they didn't even negotiate on that. We are going to come to that. So it's round. Then Nebuchadnezzar, verse 2. Nebuchadnezzar the king sent together the princes, the governors, the captains, the judges, the treasurers, and so on and so forth. All these were from all the different provinces. Now, provinces at that time, this is huge. And it's not just like small provinces. These are huge provinces. Because he had basically overcome all the kingdoms that were around. And so the provinces were not just, it's probably a state. States. Different states had to come together. So can you imagine the preparation that had gone into it? So now here, what do you think, what year is this, that this was happening, approximately, if we were to look at the dates? Anybody has an idea? They were taken to Babylon in what year?
605.
605, okay? Mind you, it could be 606 or 605. There's a double year. Okay, so 605 is when they were taken to Babylon. All right? And it wasn't too long after that Nebuchadnezzar had his first dream, right?
Yes.
So you can estimate a year or two after that.
Well, they had 3 years of study.
Right.
So after arriving in Babylon, they would have been in school
In
for
603.
3 years. Yeah.
Then it would be 602
And it was,
or 603.
It would have been soon after that Nebuchadnezzar had his dream.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know how much longer it was, but it was probably early on. It's interesting that the Cyrus cylinder, which has been found, has a list of the people of the rulers who were present at this gathering.
Right.
You know who one of them was? King Zedekiah of Judah.
Exactly.
And since he wasn't in the furnace, we can guess he was on his knees.
Okay. And so then the conquering of the king that you just mentioned, was in what year? We can estimate it was 598, 97. Okay? So by this time, it's a few years later, they had to build it, because first they had made their expedition in 598, conquered him and brought them to Babylon. And then, a few years later, after building it, we can estimate 10 years passed by to build the image, because it was so huge. The description of it is so huge that it would have taken about 10 years to build.
So, and equivalent to our measurement, how big would it have been?
According to
60
our
cubits
measurements,
high and 6 cubits wide, that's like 90 feet.
90 feet.
Whoa.
It's honking. It's honking high.
It depends
And-
on what cubits.
Yes.
If it's the royal Egyptian cubit, elbow to the tip of your middle finger, it's supposed to be 18 inches.
Yeah.
That's the royal Egyptian cubit,
Okay.
which is the
Now-
one that's used in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Okay. But since we're talking about the cubit and then the number, because I had a question, why exactly that number? Why not more
Okay.
than that? Why
Very good. That's a
66?
good question.
You
That's
know,
a very good question.
They like
And that's
six, right?
Yeah.
Babylonians like six.
I have no idea, but because I was thinking about,
uh,
you mentioned about the worship thing and then 66, what's that
There we
apply
go.
to?
exactly.
It's
So
it's,
what's
it's
the
a
number
parallel
6
revelation.
represent?
That's right.
What's the number 6 represent?
666.
Okay,
It's the number
that
of
it
the
reminds you of that
incomplete.
number, right?
It's incomplete.
Which number?
It's
That
incomplete.
is a number of Satan.
Well,
Yes.
It's also
Number
the
6.
number. It's the number of a man and it's the number of a beast, because they're both made on the 6th day.
Right. Exactly.
Genesis.
Isn't that how they did a lot of their counting and stuff? Because I
Yeah,
was hearing that like even our clock,
It's
60
six.
minutes,
It's
60
six.
seconds, all of that comes
Exactly.
from
Very
from
good.
there.
Exactly. So the first application is the number of man.
And number of a beast.
But it's transferred to Satan because he overcame man and ruled over him. That's how it got transferred to him. All right. So let's keep that in mind. Now, another thing that we can keep in mind is that the way they actually build monuments back in the day. For a monument this big, they would have had to build it with wood and then overlay it with gold completely.
Either that or you've got a lot of smelting to do.
A-
And it takes a long process.
Exactly. And for a gold that big, I don't know where they would have gotten it,
You think it got
but right, exactly.
you think it got it from the people, like by a tax or something?
Oh, I think tribute from the conquered nations,
Or, yeah,
undoubtedly.
But they were very wealthy, had a gold.
Babylon
They
had
had-
lots of gold.
Oh yes, they are the gold country back then. I mean, they were the gold country back then. I don't know
Amen.
about now, but that time.
And
Zechariah.
they took a lot of gold from Israel.
Amen.
Exactly.
That's
The temple.
Yes, a lot. Remember who showed them where it all was too.
Yeah.
Hezekiah. Remember he showed the Babylonians all of his gold,
And it was taken away from
and
him.
like a friend of mine said, when people come to us, will we show them our gold or our God? Because the Babylonians tend to take whatever's most valuable to you.
There's a difference there too. The difference is the emphasis of sharing versus showing.
Amen. Let's look at a few verses that are talking about how different things were molded. Habakkuk chapter 2 and verse 19. Someone read that? Habakkuk 2:19. Mhm. And some chapter 2 verse 19. And someone also get Matt, would you get Exodus 25:11?
Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 19.
You can read.
Okay. But to him who says to a wooden thing, awake, to a silent stone, arise, can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breeze at all in it.
Right. So the idols were mostly done that way. They would either mold like clay, and then they would overlay it with gold, or make a wood. Like they would chisel it and then overlay it with gold as well. Exodus 25:11.
25:11.
You got it?
Yep, Exodus 25:11, and you shall overlay it with pure gold, inside and out. You shall overlay it, and shall make on it a molding of gold all around.
Yeah. This is the article.
Egyptians had lots of gold too.
Yes.
And remember, when the children of Israel left, what did the Egyptians give them?
They spoiled them.
Well, they spoiled the Egyptians. They had lots of gold.
Okay, so here we have an incident where the idols were overlaid with gold, as well as the articles in the temple, in the sanctuary. All right, so very good. Let's move on. So that will bring us to verse 4. Then an herald cried out, "To you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of cornet." Now, this is where he's talking about music now. In a big gathering, usually the best thing to round people up or to bring people together is music. And music is a language that can be translated across all languages. All right, and this reaches everyone, any tribe or language or kindred tongue of people.
Pulling the heartstrings
Exactly, putting the heartstrings.
and drawing a connection with the mind mathematically.
Amen. So, know this, that in the big gatherings that are toward forming the one world government and one world order, this music is very vital. And you guys have probably heard of the connection of music to, certain satanic worship or whatever that goes into that. Music is used to emotional response, our inclinations and stuff like that. And only those, if you have a concert, there's different kind of worship. We see that all the time, right? When you go to a concert, you see all kind of instruments. A symphony, and so on and so forth. There are different kind of instruments that are being used. Let's say you had a block party. Would you have the same music as you are having when you're having a season of prayer?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. When you're working, the music you put on, is it the same? No, not the same.
When you're going to war, there's a certain kind of
Exactly.
Well, see, this is very true, and I think that, what was interesting when movies were first being made in this country, one of the film producers who introduced sound was none other than Joseph P. Kennedy, the founder of the Kennedy family, whose son, of course, would go on to be elected president.
Yeah.
He was in the movie industry for a while, and he made the statement when he introduced sound. He said, "The best movie without sound will be worse than the lousiest movie with it." Now, if Joe Kennedy were sitting here in this circle this afternoon, and you were to say to him, "Mr. Kennedy, does it matter what kind of music you play with what's seen in a movie?" He'd say, "Absolutely." People have this idea that music is all subjective. But yet, when you're watching a movie, okay, and there's a scene of battle, what kind of music goes with that? A very martial type of music that makes you feel like, wow, you're out there with them.
Exactly.
If there's a scene,
It makes you jump into it.
that's right. If there's a romantic scene, what kind of music goes with that? The kind that if you're, sitting next to your girlfriend, you start, things start to happen. Okay? If there's a scene of an attacker stalking someone, what kind of music goes with that?
You want a rousing marching tune.
Okay, Matthew.
I was just thinking as we're mentioning these different scenarios. I wonder what the mood was like when at the Last Supper. Was it the Last Supper?
Right.
Where it said
Very solemn.
they sang a hymn.
Yeah.
So, and that was like,
That was joyful.
yeah, that was like the most purest, most close to Christ you could be, but it didn't have to be this big fancy
Exactly.
hoopla thing. It was just a heart, like just,
Exactly.
It's like, man, that would be
That's
awesome
very
to do that
good.
like that.
Thank you for bringing that out. That is very good. In a solemn moment, you don't want any loud music. In a solemn moment, you don't want no loud music because that will just break up everything. You'll be confused. What's going on? Sometimes we think that we have to route up everything in order to feel like we are glorifying God.
Or I think some people think that when they get all excited from this loud music, they think it's the Holy Spirit or something. But I'm like, with that example, that's not the case.
Right. And also the opposite can be the case. We don't have to think that it's only when you're quiet and assuming the meek position that you are praising God. Okay? So that you have to look at the principle, not the nitpicking. Right. You look at the principle. Do not nitpick.
Well,
the moment you nitpick, then you're chasing a rabbit.
You know, brother, another thing we need to keep in mind is that, and this is something as a biblical theologian matters a lot to me. Worship is more than praise. You know, we talk about the praise team, the praise service. Now, praise is an important part of worship.
Amen.
But it's not the only part. When we read the Psalms, for example, there are some that are about praising God. Many that are about praising God, in fact. But there are also many more that are about confession of sin and about repentance.
Amen.
And about God's judgment.
Amen.
And about recounting the history of God's mighty acts. You know, you go through the Psalms, there's a whole variety. And I think that's really what we have in our church hymnal as well. We have songs that are directed and that are praise. We have some that are historical. We have some that involve different doctrinal issues and this kind of thing. Worship must involve everything that the Bible presents. And the unfortunate thing I fear with much of the contemporary music that we have seen in the last few decades of Christian worship is that it is very thin in terms of its biblical content. Very few of the, how many contemporary worship songs are about God's holiness? How many of them are calling you to repentance?
There are those that are about God's holiness, but I'm nitpicking over there. But I'm saying,
not many.
Yeah,
not very many. How many of them are about God's mighty acts?
I'm going to affirm your point. I'm going to affirm your point by saying the reason is because in many cases there is not a very rooted biblical learning that has been done in these cases. Because worship has been misinterpreted. It has been taught. When we teach people that worship is all about singing songs and playing a guitar, then it's a problem. That's where we are going to get into how do you worship? How do you do worship?
And who is worship to be focused on?
Exactly.
It's not to be focused on us and making us feel good. Some people, this is what they are looking for in worship music.
Amen.
They want to feel good, but that's not what worship is about. Worship isn't about us.
Exactly.
Worship is about God.
Amen.
It's our response to Him. And this is really where the problem lies. When I was growing up, a lot of this, modern youth music got started. And it started to move away from the hymns, to move away from the aspects of music that were biblically and doctrinally focused. And it was starting to be this feel good, oh, isn't it nice, you know, and isn't God this big grandfatherly figure that never says anything that
Let's
that
feel
upsets you.
good. Let's feel
Yeah.
good, but let's know what we are doing. So we'll continue our reading from verse 11, where we left off with Lincoln. So.
Me?
Mhm.
Okay. 3:11. And whoso falleth not down and worshipeth, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace.
There are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up.
Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king.
Next.
Sounds like they had some enemies that were watching,
Oh yeah,
doesn't it?
there were
That's
hawks.
me.
There were hawks in there.
Now I saw my
It's a
enemy.
good one.
These guys got promotions I deserved.
Verse 14.
Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying to them, Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the gold image which I have set up?
Verse 15, Now if you are ready, at the time you hear the sound of the horn, flute, harp, lyre, and psaltery, in symphony with all kinds of music, and you fall down and worship the image which I have made, good. But if you do not worship, you shall be cast immediately into the midst of the burning furnace.
Man,
And who is the God who will deliver you from
from my hands.
You make a challenge
Wow.
like that, the Lord's going to intervene.
All right. So a big point has been made that the center of worship should be Christ. Should be Christ. And here, this is a challenge because if you do not worship the image, you're to be cast. Now,
So what's he really saying? You don't worship me.
Right.
all those who are
Self-worship.
present. Exactly.
Self-worship.
Exactly. Self-worship, right? Exactly. Self-worship. But there's something that we need to get from this is that any other leadership aside from the leadership of God is always
Flawed.
what?
It's
Flawed.
always flawed.
It's always flawed. But it's always it's a ruling with a burning iron, not just iron, but exactly,
Sure.
exactly. It's my way or the highway, right?
It's power control. And
It's power control, right? If you don't listen to what the king is saying, you're dead meat, right?
Some people that are not they don't subscribe to a certain religion, they don't do it. I mean, they do it because they feel like they're trapped in that religion. Oh, those people, you know, that they can't do this, they cannot do that. They feel like everything is prohibited. But when we see a tyrant like this person, you know, you realize that God is actually, He gives you all the liberties. he sure does. In fact, you know, He gives you so many liberties that you get to choose whether you want to do your will or God's will.
Right.
And here you see other religions because He was creating His own religion technically.
Basically.
Are tyrannical. It's their way, like, or you know, it's the highway. But yeah, like God is not a God that, you know, makes us do things and forces us to do those things. God wants us to have the liberty to worship Him, and we get to choose. You know.
Yes. So basically, God lays out a principle, and He has His people work on that principle. That principle will apply to all cases. But the moment we move away from the principle and we want to go to specifics, then we'll start getting bumping heads.
verse 13, in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. Rage covers shame.
Yes.
Because here he set these guys up under him, and now they're undermining his authority.
His authority.
rage covers shame, because he also cares about these guys. He appreciates them, but here they are, kind of slapping him in the face and undermining his authority in front of everyone.
But he did give them an option. He said, "I'll do it one more time for you guys." So I think he did know these were pretty good guys, and he didn't like want to just throw them immediately. He's like,
Exactly.
if you know,
That's-
hey, you do it. Then.
I get the feeling that King Nebuchadnezzar didn't normally give out second chances. He was kind of
Yeah.
either you do it or
You're done.
Some have said that they'd already started killing the guys in the other chapter. we read.
Yeah.
But he respected them, like
Yeah.
Raises mentioned. He respected them so much, and that's why he would give them second chance on our next study.
Which temptation is more strong? First chance or the second chance?
It depends on how you responded to the first chance.
Okay.
Right.
But
If you responded to the first chance positively, the second chance would be less than the first. Right. But if you responded to it negatively, the second one would be what? Did I confuse you?
there was a reformer that did that. I forget which one it was. Where at first he kind of I think he denied, and then
Maybe Jerome.
I forget which one. Yeah, and then he denied. God, basically,
Right.
you know,
Think about it.
he had time to think about it. Then he came back. He's like, I can't believe I did that. I mean, he like confessed
Exactly.
it. He's like, no way, I'm for the God. And then,
Question.
Mhm.
Just a question. Where was Daniel?
That's a question
That's the question
that
we need to ask.
is that has often been asked, and we don't have an answer to it.
How did the last chapter ends?
he's in
He's in
the
the
court.
king's gate.
King's
He's
Gate,
in the King's
court,
Gate.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
He's at the courts.
And
King's
he
court.
wonders-
Do you
Sit
think
at the
king-
gates.
Do you think the king was like, I know my friend Daniel will never bow down, so he just like, hey, Daniel, you go over there. But it's like, he didn't count on his friends not obeying.
Right.
He could have been on a diplomatic mission, or
Exactly.
Troubleshooting somewhere in the
Well,
market.
think about it.
troubleshooting
Some
somewhere.
people,
Yeah.
some people say that
Because if he was there, he wouldn't have bowed down.
in chapter 2 he was at the court, the king court, and therefore he may have talked with the king may have learned from him, and so since the king know the interpretation of the statute, so he may send Daniel somewhere.
Yeah.
Also, some people were just saying that,
Okay.
but some would say like
Mhm.
Daniel know what's going on with the king.
But there's another option. He could have known, he knew what was going to happen, and he just refused to go.
Right, that's why Daniel knew what the king was
Right.
going to do. That's why, and the king also understand that Daniel, the
Yeah,
king
Daniel
know
was
about
really
Daniel's
high.
God, and then he know that Daniel
Exactly.
is faithful to the God, so they
Yeah.
know already what's going on. And that's why I asked the question, is it true that, he asked the question, is it true that you don't bow down and worship?
Right.
That, so he
Because
asked
it was
that question,
reported
you
to
know.
him. It
He
was
reported
reported to
to
him.
Reported-
Okay, so that brings us to
There are lots
the
of
the point, to the point, the viewpoint of the three of them.
Right.
Them going there, was it wrong for them to go there? Everybody was summoned. Was it wrong for them to go to the plain of Dura?
I don't think they knew what they
It's
were.
a yes or no question.
Well, I mean,
No.
going
It's
there,
not wrong.
It's not
Because
wrong.
they
It's
were,
not
it
wrong.
was kind of forced. You know, like it's not all these people decided, oh, I will RSVP. You know,
Right.
from all those provinces. I'm sure they had a lot of stuff
Right.
going
Exactly.
on, you know, but they were forced to go.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it is no. It's a no. It's not wrong for them to go. There are certain cases and certain instances where you can consent to go to a certain place, but no further.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But there are certain cases where you stand your ground and said, I'm not even going to go close, because you know yourself, right? I'm not even going to go close to that place. All right?
So,
I'll tell you a story.
oh, go ahead.
A friend and I, we were looking for a restaurant. And I found this wonderful restaurant. It's on a tavern. For me, not being on a tavern before, I didn't know. It says on the water. I didn't pay attention. It's on the water. So we arrived there, and it was a bar. It's a restaurant that is a bar, basically.
Right.
But all these people drinking around us, like, wow, this is awesome. We're in a bar. That's how awesome this is. Yeah, but anyways. No. We're like, what? This is a bar? No, I got surprised. I was like, okay, we can't go back now. We gotta get our food. We ordered our food, and I was just thinking, I was just saying, look, why are we in a bar eating vegan food in a bar?
A lot of restaurants include bars.
Exactly. So that's cool.
That doesn't
so
mean
there
you
are,
have to drink.
So that illustrate what has happened. They were called, they went. It wasn't wrong for them to go, but they couldn't go any further. They couldn't bow down to that image.
It's similar to the angels coming to earth.
Indeed. Let's read Romans chapter 12 and verse 1 and 2. So the principle is, when it comes to worship, there is no negotiation. There's no negotiation,
Yeah.
Okay, where did we leave off? We left off with Matt?
I think we have 3
Okay.
minutes to.
Yes, no problem. Oh, verse 1. Okay, you could start.
Okay, I'll go ahead, sir. So, Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2, it says, I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. And verse 2, and do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God.
Will of God. Okay, amen. So what is this text saying to you
That
about worship?
we need to, sacrifice for God. I think that the real believer is willing to give their life for God.
Great.
And it reminded me, like, worship, our lives should be worship. It's not a ceremony that we go
Right.
to. Our lives are a living worship, a living sacrifice for God.
Worship.
Not just one day a week.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's not a one day a week thing. It's not
If we live for
twice in a
self-
year.
If we live for ourselves 6 days a
Consistently.
week, we cannot live for God one day a
Amen.
week. Yeah.
Amen. Yeah. So the text is saying, be not conformed to this world. When it comes to worship, you do not want to conform to the world. You do not want to conform to the world. Yes, we are of the world, but not of this. We are in the world, but not of this world. So, because of that, we are being transformed the opposite direction. Not downward direction, but upward direction. That's how we're being transformed, not conformed. Conform is going down. Transform is going up. Okay? By doing what? Renewing of your minds. That you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. The purpose for living a life of worship is to show the goodness of God.
1 Peter 2:9 ties into that. It talks about being set aside as a royal priesthood.
Royal priesthood. Amen. That's amazing. So that's
And it also
brings us to an end about music and worship. How important that is, because when we come before God, we're bringing our worship with us. We're bringing our way of life with us. So we come to bless God, even as God blesses us. right? And when we worship God as a corporate people, going back to the idea of love, as a corporate people, we're coming from different walks of life, and we're coming together. Look, it is not, you're not coming to get favors from people. You're coming to get a favor of God, not from people. Jesus didn't ask favors from people and didn't want favors from no one, right? But you're coming to give a blessing to God and to your fellow man, to affirm each other in the struggle that we are in. We're in a great controversy, aren't we? Yes, we are. We're coming together to affirm each other in this struggle we are in. When we forget that, guess what? We're not together in worship. When we forget that, we are coming to give a blessing. Not to get a blessing from people. Yes, we'll get a blessing from God, but we are here to bless God, to bless each other. Okay, I thought Hebrews says only a higher person can bless it. No, that's a different kind of blessing, like bestowing upon somebody. The blessing, of thanksgiving, a blessing of thanksgiving, a blessing of affirming someone in their faith. If someone comes to church, you don't care how they are dressed, It's not the time to point out how they are dressed. It's not the time to give them a baptismal Bible study. Oh,
We're just glad they're there.
be glad they are there. Exactly.
Now, when you're on the nominating committee and you're deciding who's going to be a greeter, then there are standards.
Then there are the standards.
That's different.
Exactly.
And when you're going to baptize people.
Yeah.
When you're bringing people into the fold. I mean, it's you can't bury someone till they're dead.
All right. Let's have a. You have a last one, and then we'll close.
Consideration that part of worship is testimonies.
Exactly.
And Ellen White makes a statement. She said there should be far more testimonies in our church rather than sermonizing.
Yes, she does say that.
So that's top-down versus interactive, relationship-oriented.
Yep.
Yeah, we did that at one of my churches in Greater New York on the Sabbaths when I missed my train.
James, would you close out?
Sure. Father in heaven, Lord, we just want to thank you so much for your word and, Lord, the lessons that you teach us through your servants who stood up for the right and did not waver, regardless of what tests and trials came their way. Lord, let that be our resolve as well as we look at the topics, maybe in our own lives, in our own hearts, about music. And Lord, if it's in the right spirit, or if it's something that we need to potentially surrender to you. So Lord, we thank you so much for everything, and we ask that the meditation of our hearts and our worship be acceptable unto you. And we thank you so much. In the name of Jesus.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Today, because of fall break, we were not able to continue our study at Bola Hall. But next week, we'll continue with the rest of chapter Daniel 3 back at room 115 Bola Hall. Yeah, and